Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we're doing my fall wrap up. So we're gonna run through all the books that I read in September, October, and November because it has now been months since I have done a wrap up. I didn't read a whole lot in September and October, but I did quite a bit of reading in November. So let's dive in. So let's start with a couple of DNFs that I had over the months. I won't get too much into these, but first we'll start with Lethal Lit by K. Ankrum. I don't have a physical copy. I started listening to it as an audiobook. It is sort of a YA mystery, I think, and I have really loved pretty much everything that I've read from K. Ankrum before, and so that's why I was like, okay, this is not a genre or a book that I would normally read, but I thought I would give it a try. And I ended up DNFing it mostly because I realized that it was actually part of a larger story. Apparently there is a podcast that predates this book. So I ended up DNFing it because I was like, I don't think that I can enjoy this without listening to the podcast, but I really don't want to listen to the podcast. So this is the first and only K. Ankrum book that I have DNF'd, and that was a little bit sad. But other DNFs, I picked up A Swarming of Bees by Teresa Tomlinson. This is another mystery. I really shouldn't even try reading like genre mystery. This is like a cozy historical mystery, but even so, mystery as like a primary genre, just not for me, I think. If you're into kind of medieval, like historical cozy mysteries, maybe this would be more up your alley, but I don't think that is the genre for me. I was just kind of bored in a similar way to how I have felt about other historical cozy mysteries that I have tried. I also DNF'd The Tread of Angels by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is another author that I have read before and loved. I loved Rebecca Roanhorse's other series, the Sixth World series, and the one that starts with Black Sun. I've loved those. So I wanted to give this a try. However, I knew that this may not work for me for a few reasons. One is that it has kind of like a Western setting, and because it is about angels. And honestly, as far as like mythical beings go, the whole like angels and demons dichotomy is just one I cannot get into. Like I just very rarely, if ever, enjoy it. So I kind of went into this knowing that this may not be for me, but because I like this author, I want to give it a shot. I finally got around to it and determined it's just not for me. I'm going to have to accept that there is a Rebecca Roanhorse book that I just couldn't get into, which is also disappointing. I hate it when there's like an author that you love and you're like, oh, I just love everything that they write, and then you find the one book that makes it so you cannot say that statement. You cannot say, I love everything that they've written. It's so frustrating and disappointing. And then the final DNF that I had over the fall was The Passion of Dulce by Julie Berry. This is another historical fiction. This is following a girl who is also like a healer, which is part of why I was very interested in it. I've had this book for a couple of years now. I have tried to get into it. I've tried to read it. I think this was the third time, and every time I just can't. So I think I need to accept that it's just not going to be a book for me. So those were all the books that I DNF'd during the fall. Now we can dive into the books that I actually read. So starting with September, I only read 2 books in September. The first one was Thorn Hedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a novella. It is a fantasy fairy tale retelling of Sleeping Beauty. T. Kingfisher does a lot of fairy tale retellings, and her books have been kind of hit or miss for me. I have really enjoyed a couple of her books, but then a lot of her books, actually especially her more fairy tale retelling kind of books, often are misses for me. So I listened to the audiobook for this. I decided to just get it from my library, and this one I think was a miss. It is not one that I didn't dislike it as much as some other books that I have read from her, but it was just very forgettable and lackluster for me personally. So this, as I said, is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but it is told from the perspective of the fairy who curses her and now is kind of locked into guarding this sleeping princess. And we find out more of this backstory of how this came about, the connection between these two people, why this fairy cursed her, and what it has been like to have to remain here isolated, guarding this sleeping woman, and why that is an important task. The things I liked about this was, one, I really liked her reinterpretation of this story and these characters. I think that the way in which like the reasoning behind why this fairy did this and the connection between these two characters and all this was very interesting, and I liked that like reinterpretation of the story and the source material. I also enjoyed the way that she wrote the fairies, but then when it came to the actual story itself and the characters in it, I don't know, they just didn't really do anything for me. I had no strong feelings, and I don't have a lot else to like say about this overall, like other than the interesting like premise of it. It was fairly forgettable for me. I think I gave it like 3 or 3.5 stars. I'm not exactly sure. After that, I read another kind of mediocre book, which was Chaos and Flame by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland. So this was written by 2 authors, and it has 2 main points of view. Each author wrote one of the points of view, and I buddy read this with Kara, which I'm really glad that we buddy read it, because there were things about the way the world building was done that I kept being like, did I like black out and miss when they introduced this like plot point or world building, or did they just not tell us about this before? This is another one that I think some elements of the story were interesting. I think they made a few interesting choices in terms of the plot and directions that they would go and choices the characters would make. But overall, I felt like the plot was kind of lackluster. I think one of the main pieces of the plot is the romance between these 2 main characters, and honestly it moved way too fast. But also I felt like the world building was not as strong as I would have wanted it to be, and I think that there were certain elements of both character traits and world elements that could have been more consistently woven throughout. And I just remember towards the end there's like a big climax at the end, and one of my last messages to Kara was just a long list of things where I was like, so this happened. Since when is that possible? Apparently this is a fact about this world. Since when? Like, it was just a list of things and I was like, since when? Since when? Like, none of this was explained to us. And there were some elements of like things that like reveals at the end that I also felt like I had no world or like cultural context for. Like, how horrific is this? Like, I get it that it's bad, but because you've never introduced this element previously, I don't know how bad. I gave this a solid 3 stars. I was like, it was real meh. I am slightly curious as to what happens in this story. This is the first book. I think it's a duology, so there's going to be a second book coming out in 2024. I do not plan to read it. However, I am slightly intrigued as to like, I just kind of want to know what happened, but my level of commitment is like, I want someone else to read it and explain the plot points to me, or like I would read a Wikipedia article summary. That's my level of commitment. I'm not committed enough to like actually read the next book. Now we can get into October. So the first book that I read in October was a very short novella called The Companion by E.E. Ottoman. This is a polyamorous, queer, historical romance. I think going into this, I completely misunderstood what the plot of this book was going to be, like the plot and the vibe. Like, I knew that it was about a trans woman who goes to live in the country with a trans man, and that there's a romance between them, and that somehow it was going to be polyamorous. Like, I got that part. For some reason, I thought that the guy who lived in the country was going to be like a scientist or a botanist or something like that, and he was searching for like a specific type of mushroom or something, and then she was going to go become like, you know, his sciencey assistant or something and help him track this down, and then they were going to like slowly fall in love. The plot of it was just very different, but also the speed of it was very different. Like, I understand going into a romance novella, the romance is going to move quite a bit faster than it would in like a longer romance book. However, I have still read romance novellas in which the pacing of the romance didn't feel very rushed. It still felt almost like a slow burn, even though it was done in such a short number of pages. This moved very fast and jumped right into the like steamy scenes very quickly, and just too quickly for my personal taste. Maybe if you're somebody who is looking for, you know, this kind of queer polyamorous historical fiction or historical romance, and you want something that just like dives into the steamy scenes very quickly, this may be much more up your alley. I felt like we didn't get enough time to really get to know the characters or understand their connections and relationships. It was all right. I gave it 3.5 stars. After that, I completed Watering the Soul by, what's the author's name? Courtney Peppernell. This is a poetry collection, which I had the physical copy, but I actually lent it to my mom, so I don't have it right now. But I picked this up recently, partially because the cover art is so adorable. It's so cute. And there were some poems that I enjoyed. I just think that it didn't really feel like poetry very often to me. My camera's about to die, so I have to replace the battery. Just a second. And we're back. Okay. I think also I need to go faster because this is a lot of books, and this is gonna take forever. It might take a long time to talk about each one of them. Okay. Next book that I read is The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. This is historical fiction, a little bit historical fantasy. Honestly, I thought it was going to be more fantasy than it was, and I feel like it could have leaned into that a little bit more. In this, we're following two main perspectives who are kind of on opposite sides of a like centuries-long war between these two magical races. So one of our main characters is from this people of like fire wielders, but she is one of the very last of her kind. She is married to a king, she has a son, and she is willing to do whatever she has to in order to protect her son and get him into power. So she is very conniving and manipulative, and really like involved in the politics. The other perspective that we're following is from this other magical race of people, who their like mission is to hunt and destroy all of the people or all of the beings from this like magical race, the fire people, magical race of people. So this other perspective that we're following, she's a healer of her people. She has had a fairly sheltered life. She's been kept away from humanity. However, she then gets assigned to spy on some humans, and in the process learns that she has been like sheltered and lied to and manipulated far more than she realized, and that the world is actually very different than she thought, especially the world of humanity. I think it probably will be obvious that that second perspective is the one that I enjoyed more personally, partially because she's a healer, partially because she has this sort of internal journey as she is realizing ways in which she has been controlled and lied to, and how that changes her internal world. Those are things that I really enjoy. However, I don't think that it focused on that enough. I think that this book a little bit falls into an issue that I find in a lot of historical fiction, and one of the reasons that like sometimes I find it hard to get into historical fiction is because maybe I'm just not getting the point of historical fiction, but sometimes I feel like it focuses too much on the history. Not that I want it to be less historically accurate, but I feel like a lot of historical fiction gets very caught up in the minutia of the historical events and doesn't spend enough time on the character development, which is really what I'm reading for. Like, I am first and foremost forever a character-focused reader. Like, that's what I'm here for. But especially in something like historical fiction, like if I just wanted to know more about events of this time, I could read nonfiction about it, and there's a reason that I don't. I'm not that interested in historical nonfiction. What I am really here for, and the reason that I would read historical fiction, is because I want to really get into the perspective of a person living in this time and place. I want to like see this world and these events through their eyes and see the impacts on that person. So I really want much more of an emphasis on the character experience and less so on the historical events. And I think that that really, you know, maybe is me misunderstanding the point of historical fiction, or maybe is just a preference, you know. I'm like, there is certainly historical fiction that focuses more on character than on, you know, plot. But I just felt like this one had some interesting elements to characters and just didn't take advantage of them. I was kind of underwhelmed by this. At the moment, I am thinking I will probably give the second book a try, see how it goes, but I'm not totally committed to this series. I think I gave this book 4 stars because I was like, it was well written and it had some interesting parts and there were things about the characters that I liked. Maybe it should have been more like a 3.5 stars. I don't really know. After that, I read Forestborn by Elaine Audrey Becker. This is a YA fantasy. It is the first book in a duology. And it is following this character who is in this world where like there is this sort of wild magic, but it has been sort of relegated to a certain place, and most of society is in this other part of the world where there isn't really magic, and magic is very distrusted, but our main character is a shapeshifter and there is a lot of distrust around her. However, she has been kind of taken in by the royal family and serves as like a, not exactly a spy, but like kind of a jack of all trades, like does a lot of different things for them because of her shapeshifting ability. There are increasing movements in other countries to like eradicate all magic and magical people. There is also a plague or a sickness that is starting to go around, and one of the princes, who is a good friend of our main character, becomes sick. So they have to kind of travel into this more like wild magic area to try and find a cure. And so she goes with the other prince, who she does not like, and her own brother, and they all like are on this journey, and along the way they discover a lot of other things that are going on. Other than that, I don't really have a lot to say about this book. I had no feelings about it, especially the first half, like no feelings. Second half got more interesting. It was going in some kind of interesting directions with the plot, but even so, I just really don't have any strong like thoughts or feelings or opinions about this. So I think I gave this one 3 stars as well. So as you can see, I had a lot of 3-star books. That's the end of my October reading. now we're into November. So November is where my reading picks up a little bit, but also I have my worst book of the season in November. But starting off on a high note, I reread Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. You'll see I have quite a few Sarah Addison Allen books. I kind of went on a little bit of a Sarah Addison Allen kick in November. I picked this up because in October I watched Practical Magic, and then after that I was like, I need to read a book with practical magic vibes. And I had read this a couple years ago and remember thinking this had kind of a similar vibe to it. So I picked it up, reread it. It was a delight once again. I love this book. And it does very much have like practical magic vibes to it. It's a little more wholesome, a little less dark, but I think that it really still like fits the bill if that's kind of what it is that you're looking for. It has a lot of similarities in the plot. It is about, there are these two sisters who live in a small town. They come from like a family of women who have these kind of uncanny magical powers. Each person kind of has their own special ability that they can do. One of the sisters is like very identified with like the family and the family home and stays in town, and then the other one, who's kind of the wild one, leaves town as soon as she can, goes traveling around, gets involved with a very dangerous man. She also has a child with him, and then eventually decides to leave him, come back to her hometown, and try to kind of hide out and escape from that life. So there's a lot about like family, and there's some very wholesome romances, and about, you know, life and love and learning the lessons you need to learn and living your life. So this is a delightful book. I love the way that Sarah Addison Allen writes. Her books are just, they have this kind of whimsical, cozy feel to them. There's baking magic in this, and I just can fly through her books. Like, they're pretty short, but just there's something about the writing that they're so easy to read and just fly through, and I love this. Oh, and I gave this 5 stars again. Then after rereading that, I had ordered some other Sarah Addison Allen books, and while I was waiting for them to come, I picked up a different book which did not go over so well, which was Mythago Wood by Robert Holdstock. I don't necessarily want to get into all of the details as to why I did not enjoy this book, because I could rant about this for a very long time. But there's like, okay, I'll tell you what the premise is. It is set in England, I think right after World War II. One of our main character that we're following, I think his name is Stephen, fought in World War II, came home to like his family home. His father has died, his brother Christian still lives there. Their mother died a long time ago, but their father died more recently. His brother Christian still lives there. When he comes back, their family home is like right next to this kind of mysterious wood, this mysterious forest, which their father was obsessed with. He would go out into the wood, explore it, had huge amounts of notes, and was doing some kind of experiments. Was just like obsessed with it and pretty much ignored them. And Stephen never really knew what it was. Apparently, while he was gone, Christian became more involved in their father's research and learned more about what it was that he was doing, and now wants to like continue the father's research, kind of for his own motivation. He has his own motivations that are not purely scientific. Or anyway, apparently what the father had discovered is that these woods had kind of a magical nexus in them that connected to like the collective unconscious. And so when a person goes into this wood, it will create these manifestations of archetypes from throughout history that have like reoccurred through history, but the like exact details of that manifestation is influenced by the subconscious of the person that has like entered the wood. So there are these Mythagos who have been influenced by the subconscious of the father. There was a Mythago who was this young woman, this young girl named what was her name? Gwyneth? There we go. Named Gwyneth, who the father fell in love with. Christian, the brother, then also fell in love with. And then something happened to her, and that is why he wants to continue on with his father's research in order to find Gwyneth. However, look, this is kind of spoilery, but I just can't like explain things about this unless I spoil a little bit about this book, because essentially what happens is Christian like goes off into the wood to try and remanifest Gwyneth so that he can be obsessed with her. While he's doing that, Gwyneth shows up, and then our main character, Stephen, also falls in love with her, and is like obsessed with her. The premise of this initially, like at the most high level, I think is interesting. This idea of this magical forest that can magically tap into the collective unconscious and manifest these archetypes, the way that that interacts with the individual subconscious, and how that can kind of flavor the specific manifestation of these people. And I just think a lot of those elements are really interesting and personally really speak to my own interests, because like some of my background is that like in undergrad I was a psychology major and a classical studies minor with a focus on ancient religions and mythology. I've also done a lot of research around things like Jungian psychology, collective unconscious, Joseph Campbell's work around archetypes, and a lot of other like related and derivative theories of psychology and personality and, you know, the subconscious and things like that. So these are all things I'm very interested in. So like that premise sounds so interesting to me. And also, of course, I love a magical forest. All right, I got a phone call, so I had to step away for a minute. And now the sun has gone down, so my lighting might be a little bit different. And I've forgotten where I was in talking about books. But we'll keep going, and hopefully I'll remember what I was saying. I think I was talking about Mythago Wood and how much I didn't like it. I think I already covered that the high-level premise of the collective unconscious and archetypes and magical wood is very interesting to me. But then when it comes to the actual execution of story, characters, even the concept itself, I feel like this book really fell flat, and then it did some things that I like really did not like specifically. So first of all, just like the writing in this, I think is so dry, and I don't like it. Not the most dry thing I've ever read, honestly, but still, it is so dry in comparison to what I was expecting. I read reviews talking about how fantastic the writing is, and especially the writing of like the forest and like the setting, and how you really feel like you're there, and like he describes like the smells of the place and everything. And just like I felt like the writing was very dry. I did not feel like it built atmosphere well. And honestly, I wish he didn't talk about the smells, because he literally only talked about how bad everyone around him smelled. And every time he encountered a Mythago, he always was just pretty much like, and this person reeks, like they have lived in the woods and have not taken a bath in 20 years. That being like the only time he describes smells. It's not like he talks about any other smells ever. Anyways, that was just a pet peeve, but did not enjoy the writing. I think the characters were incredibly flat and bland. They were not well realized, not well articulated or filled out. They just were a whole lot of nothing. And all of the relationships in this were just so boring. Both familial relationships, romantic relationships, like literally any relationship. I just was like, I could not care less. And then the romantic relationship with Gwyneth, or whatever her name was. Oh my god. Gwyneth as a character, first of all, she is the only female character in this entire book. She is it's very unclear, for one thing, how old she is, because there's one point where they say that she's probably around 16 or 17. Like, in some ways she's kind of ageless because she is an archetype built from the the collective unconscious and the subconscious minds of these men. But also the actual manifestation of her, they do mention one time that she might be like 16 or 17. And yet when they describe her, she sounds like she's maybe 11 to 12 years old in the way that they describe her body, which they do quite a bit, because Stephen is obsessed with her and they do sleep together. When they do sleep together, he specifically says how like wildly attracted he is to her childlike sexuality. Again, every man in this story falls in love with her and is obsessed with her. Partially because, as like the only female character in this book, she is a manifestation of their subconscious. And so like I get sometimes people are like, yeah, obviously, like, she's a manifestation of their subconscious, so like she's going to be a poor representation of women. And I'm like, that doesn't make it better to me, and that doesn't make it more interesting. That doesn't add complexity. I think that strips it of complexity. However, if that was going to be the point, they maybe could have made it more interesting by more intentionally exploring the way in which it strips her of agency and individuality for her to be this manifestation of the subconscious desires of men. But that wasn't done. Like, they didn't do that. I saw a review that, if I can find it again, I will link it below, where somebody like described all of this, but they specifically described her as a character and her personality as a cross between a blow-up doll and a pet raccoon, which I actually think is the perfect way to describe her character, her personality, her role in the story. So I was really expecting a lot more from this, and it really underwhelmed and disturbed. This book was terrible in like every aspect. I don't think there's a single thing it did well. Anyway, this was 1 star. Usually this is the kind of thing I would have DNF'd, but somehow this one like trapped me into hate reading it. I do not make a habit of hate reading books. I think part of why I continued was because I had such high hopes for it, because it had so many, like, conceptually had so many elements that I wanted, that I would have loved, and I just really kept hoping it was going to get better, or it was going to like hit some point where I was like, now I get why people like this, or like now it's really like hit its stride. Never did. It was terrible, and I gave it 1 star. Okay, that's my rant. Okay, so after that, let me find what I read next. Okay, so after that, I read another Sarah Addison Allen book. This is Other Birds, her most recent release. I think it came out in 2022. So this is following a girl whose mother died and left her this apartment, or this condo, on a island, I think near South Carolina, called Mallow Island. So she goes to find this condo to hopefully find out more about her mother who died, who she really doesn't know that much about, and also kind of to like restart her life. And so while she's there, she encounters a whole bunch of characters who also live in this condo, and very soon after she moves in, one of them dies, and she ends up helping out to clear out this person's apartment and find out more about her life. They try to contact her estranged son, and she's kind of enmeshing herself into the lives of the people in this condo. There are also some like side plots that kind of weave in throughout. Like, there's one about this like author who wrote a book about the island. We follow some about the estranged son, and then each of the characters who live in this condo kind of have their own plot lines that are interconnecting. And I had this is one of those books that it was exactly what I wanted to read at the time in terms of mood, but I didn't think it was a great book. So I think I gave this 3.5 stars. Then I read Practical Magic, the book. So this kind of continued that, like, I watched Practical Magic, then I reread Garden Spells, and then I was thinking, you know what, I'm still in the mood for that. I should read the actual Practical Magic book. This is technically a reread for me because I read a version of this a couple years ago. It was an audiobook that I found, I think, on Scribd, and at the time I didn't realize that it was an abridged version. And then after I read it, I realized that, and I was like, oh, maybe that's why it kind of felt like there were things missing, you know? So I always felt a little bit like maybe I should give it another try, and I decided to finally like pick up the physical book, read it this way, and also like not the abridged version. And I don't think it helped. So I was not really a fan of this book. The feeling that I had about the abridged version, where I was like, oh, it feels kind of empty, like there are things missing from this, didn't really leave. Like, I think that this still feels a little bit hollow. The writing itself, I think, was overly descriptive in a way that really wasn't helpful for setting, like for creating atmosphere or giving context to things. It doesn't really have chapters, it just has like a few like very large chunks. And there's something about the style of writing that feels like it has this sort of rolling cadence to it. So between that and the lack of like shorter chapters, it feels like there's no natural stopping point, which if I was really enjoying it, maybe I wouldn't have minded, but because I was not enjoying this, it was kind of frustrating that it didn't have any like natural like rise and fall to the story. The writing, like the voice of the writing, felt very affected. It was very focused on really describing like the quirky whimsy of this place in a way that I just found kind of annoying, and again, didn't set atmosphere. It just felt very like awkwardly affected. It really felt like 90% of this book is just fluff with like flickers of story here and there. There's very little like actual content of story in this book, I think. I think that also the characters feel very shallowly drawn. There was this real, like, I don't know how to articulate this like issue that I had with it, that it had this real focus on like how incredibly beautiful these women were in a way that felt like that was the only thing that mattered, because it didn't really give them a lot more personality. It was really just like, they're so incredibly beautiful, men like fall all over themselves to be with them and like are obsessed with them. Even in like the romantic relationships, when they finally did find like a good relationship and like a connection with somebody, the book would tell us that they are like a soul connection, and yet didn't show us any of that, and really only focused on how incredibly beautiful they are. And there was no like actually building the characters and the relationships and understanding of like the romance and like why there's a connection. It really just felt like, well, he's obsessed with her because she's the most beautiful person he's ever seen. I wanted the book to be like making some kind of commentary then, if it was going to focus on like their incredible beauty. I think once in a while it attempted to have commentary on something about how they were treated by men because of their beauty and allure. But I don't think it was done very successfully or with a lot of great nuance, and just really fell flat. So I did not enjoy this book. Rereading the full thing did not do it any favors. And even just, you know, listening to the abridged version, I think I got what I needed to out of this. And here's my hot take about this book. One, it's not that good. Two, the movie is better than the book. And three, if you want a book that gives you the vibes of the practical magic of the movie, read Garden Spells. Those are my hot takes on this. All right, so next up we have Boudica, Dreaming the Bull. This is the second book in the Boudica series. It is a historical fiction series that is about Boudica, who was a warrior queen among the Iron Age Celts, who led her people in rebellion to fight back against the Roman invasion and occupation of Iron Age Britain. And the first book I really loved. I especially loved the first half of the first book, where it was really doing a lot of context setting for like the characters and the culture. But this second book, we're again following multiple perspectives. I guess I shouldn't really say like which perspectives we're following at this point, because that may spoil who lives and who dies in this series. But we are following a perspective of someone who is living among the Romans who are invading Ireland. And that is the main perspective that we're following in this. And while it was a character that I enjoyed in the first book, I just did not find his character as engaging in this book. I think this one fell a little bit into the same issue that I had with Children of Gods and Fighting Men, where it focused so much on the plot and the activities that were going on, and not enough on the characters and their internal experiences. Because like, especially with this perspective, it focused so much on like his great military strategy and his actions and all of the battles that he was getting into. And we didn't need all of that detail. And yet this character is clearly spiraling. Like internally, we know like he is having a rough time, and yet we spend very little time actually experiencing or exploring that aspect of the story and character experience. And that is really the thing that I wanted to know more about. What is his internal world? What is the inner conflict that he is having? You know, how is he connecting or not? Like, he seemed like he was lonely. We could have explored his loneliness. Like there was so much that was there. Like you could tell stuff was going on with him, but we really didn't dive into it. And I just wish that we had, and it just was way too much focusing on like all of the battles that they were doing, which I think was very unnecessary. So I gave this one 3 stars. I was kind of disappointed in this second book. However, it left off in a place that makes me very optimistic for the next book. If you watched my last video, which was a book haul, I did buy the 3rd and 4th book in the series, so clearly I'm feeling optimistic about finishing this series. This left off in a place where I think in the next book, from what I can tell, we are going to be getting some new perspectives, or more of a couple of the like minor perspectives in this are going to become more of a focus in the next book, and they are characters that I think will be really interesting to read from, so I'm looking forward to that. And then also the perspective that was the main one in this, that I was like, he clearly has a lot going on. By the end of the book, he's in a very different situation than at the beginning, and seems like, you know, he's still going to be having a rough time, but is probably going to be it seems like he's going to be going on a bit of a spiritual journey, which I am looking forward to, because the spirituality that was explored in the first book was one of my favorite parts of it. And so I'm very much looking forward to that. And I think that may give me more of that like internal experience. I'm feeling optimistic about the next book. Okay, after that, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I actually started this in October to read around Halloween, but then for reasons I had to pause it for a little while and picked it back up and finished it in November. And I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to, just because I have very mixed experience with like Gothic horror. Sometimes, most of the time, I assume it's not going to work with me, but I have had a few exceptions. So I have been wanting to kind of test the waters of the genre a little bit more to see if I can find something that I like. And I did really enjoy Mexican Gothic. The first half of the book was very slow and really was a lot of setup, but I liked it. I think it established the characters really well. The main character, I really liked her. And one of the things I liked especially about the way she was written is that she is a very headstrong character. Sometimes when there are characters that are, especially female characters that are just described as like headstrong, it just means that they're stupid. Like, it just means that they make ridiculous, rash decisions and will not listen to good advice. I did not feel like that was the case with this character. I think that it was as a personality trait was well integrated into her character, so that when she did make those kinds of decisions, it felt like it came from an authentic place. And then the second half of the book was just a lot of me going like, oh my God, what? I am not somebody who reads a lot of horror, so I think this is very like low-key horror for a lot of people. However, because I liked this and I liked What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, I like maybe like Gothic fungus horror is my niche, you know? Maybe that is my horror niche. Because those are the two horror books that I've enjoyed. I don't know, but I'm really glad that I read this, and I definitely want to read more things from Silvia Moreno Garcia. I gave this 4 stars. Okay, then after that, I read Lost Lake, also by Sarah Addison Allen. There's a real theme that in November. So this is another like fabulism standalone. It is following this woman who a year ago her husband died, and for the past year she's kind of been sleepwalking through life. At the very beginning of this book, our main character kind of snaps out of or wakes up from this kind of hazy existence that she's been in for the last year, and realizes that her life has kind of become something that she doesn't recognize. At that same time, she happens to find a postcard from like her aunt, who she hasn't seen for years, and that spurs her to decide to go and try and find and reconnect with this aunt. So she packs up herself and her daughter, and they drive to find this aunt who has like a lakeside resort, or like it's kind of like a camping ground sort of thing, called Lost Lake. And so it's, you know, following her as she is reconnecting with her aunt, trying to reestablish what is her life going to be like now without her husband, and now that she has kind of lived her life in this haze for the past year, what is she going to, you know, make her life be now? It's also following the aunt, who is much older. Her own husband died many years ago, and she is debating whether she should sell the place or if she should, you know, keep it going. She has a friend that has lived with her for a long time who is also dealing with her own ghosts from her past, somewhat literally. And I think that this is dealing a lot with grief, people in the different stages of grief, fighting for the life that you want, making your own choices, not giving up those choices or agency to other people. So I really enjoyed this. Oh, and I think I gave this 4.5 stars. All right, we're on to the final book in this wrap up. This is my fault for not doing a wrap up for 3 months, is that then I have to wrap up a ton of books all at once. And I am getting tired, but we're on to the final book, which really ended the month on a high note, which is Unraveler by Frances Hardinge. So this is the first Frances Hardinge book that I have read, but I've been wanting to try her books. I've heard very good things about them. I know that Kara loves Frances Hardinge, and so I've just been kind of curious about her books. And also this book cover is absolutely beautiful. So I'm very glad that I liked it because it's always so disappointing when you get a beautiful book and then you don't like it and you're like, well, I guess I don't keep it now but it's so pretty. Anyways, this is beside the point, but this is a YA standalone fantasy that is set in this world where if someone like hates somebody enough, over time they can build up what they call a curse egg, so they are able to curse somebody. And for the most part, there aren't really ways to undo these curses. They're relatively rare, but they are very serious in this world. But we're following a couple of characters, one of whom, I think his name is Kellen. He is what they call an Unraveler. He has this special ability to unravel things, including curses. Now, he can't do it instantaneously. Essentially, the way that he does it is by kind of figuring out like the mystery of like who cursed this person and why they were cursed, tracking that person down, getting them to unravel the curse. Like, that's how he does it. And then he has a friend who he actually released from a curse, and she travels with him now and helps him, especially with his people skills because he is abrasive. And they are traveling together and they unravel curses. They get kind of caught up in this larger story and plot because they are kind of forced by a mysterious patron to investigate some specific curses because there is suspicion about a larger plot among cursors in this world. So they are kind of going from place to place unraveling curses, and then it eventually sort of culminates in this larger plot that shows how these things are connected. And I really enjoyed this. I started this months ago, earlier in 2023, and I was physically reading it and I was really enjoying it, but then it was right before I like hit my reading slump in May. So I put it down, picked it back up again. I actually picked it up as an audiobook this time, and I enjoyed the physical book, but I really loved the audiobook. I think this is a really interesting and unique world. Magical creatures and beings in this, the way that the magic in this in particular works, I really enjoyed. There's just like so many interesting elements to it. It has this kind of dark, whimsical feel to it, but when I say whimsical, I think a lot of times the term whimsical is used to mean something that is absurdist or nonsensical, and that's not what this is like at all. It feels whimsical in this very grounded way, in that this world is very strange and very unlike other things, which is why it feels whimsical, but it also feels like a very grounded world. Such an interesting world, such an interesting vibe to it. I liked the characters in it. And, you know, I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel about the fact that it's essentially like a lot of little mysteries all tied together, and mystery is not always a thing that I like, but I thought that these mysteries were very interesting, especially because they were so dependent on characters and relationships, because these curses come about because of these like intense feelings within relationships. And so it was very interesting to see them like unravel each of those like motivations between people. I gave this, I think, 4.5 stars. Really enjoyed it. Definitely want to read more from Frances Hardinge. So those are all the books that I read this fall. I would love to know how your autumnal reading went, or what are you looking forward to for your winter reading. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.